So today's first session, I'm really excited about. The topic is combating founder fatigue, stress, and burnout. This is a really important topic, and we are all a lot more open about discussing mental health, especially in the founder community. So hopefully you guys really enjoy this and resonate with it. We're going to really talk about how to avoid fatigue, stress, and burnout, and how our speakers manage that and balance those different stressors in their life with building a startup. And so we've got Dan Hightower from Carta, who will be moderating and kicking us off this morning. And then two founders from the most recent Techstars class, Alex Friedman, CEO and founder of Howdy, and Dieumerci Christel, CEO and founder of Enlight. If you guys want to, get this started and talk about this really important topic.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. Excited to be here, and what a great week to do it. I think we're at day 2 of, what are they calling it? Mental Health Awareness Week. So for those who are listening and you just joined, welcome. If we can all agree on one thing, community is key for founder mental health. So would highly recommend you pop up in the chat. I think you have a chat function. Introduce yourselves, where you're based, and what you're building. You might meet somebody there. While we do that, let's meet our guests. So DM, Alex, how are you?
I am doing great.
Awesome. You want to spend a quick sec introducing yourselves, DM? You start?
Yes. So my name is DM. Just moved here from North Dakota, originally from Africa, and I run a company called Enlight App, where we help teachers engage their students through their passions.
Cool. Hey, DM. Hi, I'm Alex Friedman. I'm the founder of Howdy, a vertical search engine for communities and events. I also recently launched Founder Gigs, a talent marketplace for founders to find part-time and hourly work with other startups. And then previously, I was the program manager for both Techstars Austin and Techstars Impact.
Dang. And you know each other from the cohort, right?
Yes, we do.
Oh, that's cool. So I'll be on the outside of a lot of inside jokes probably. So I'm Dan. I'm the panel moderator. I currently am director of growth product at Carta. I'm focused on Carta Launch, which is our free software for founders. Basically helps them fundraise and manage their equity really well. Prior to Carta, I founded 2 venture-backed startups where I encountered my fair share of stress and arguably burnout. I also spent 5 years in a different high stress role in the Army Special Forces. I'm not really sure which one caused the majority of my gray hair, which you can see here on my chin. But what is certain is that I'm super pumped to chat today with 2 amazing founders about how to manage stress and burnout. Not to structure it too much, but I don't think we have any like immediate questions from the panel or the audience. Please drop them in. We'll answer them as we go along. But maybe we kick it off with a couple of just really high level talking points. So we can either just open it up, DM Alex, or I can start peppering you with questions. Up to you.
Yeah, so I'll just get started, so I actually started my company like my freshman year. So the summer of my freshman year of college. So I literally built all this thing through college. And so stress was 2 sides. It was like the startup side and the school side. And so I learned a lot through that of how to manage like the school stress versus, the startup stress. And I created this like operating system of non-negotiables for me, which like really brought in my community and my friends to really help me basically make sure that I'm actually having fun. And, but there's a few things that I want to talk about a little bit later that I was dropping the ball on. For example, like, working out like was a big thing that I dropped the ball on. But I'm really excited to get into this operating system that I kind of created for myself. Now let Alex also, speak a little bit about this.
Wait, I didn't even know you did that. That's awesome. I would have totally asked you for that during Techstars. I think one of my biggest like burnout or mental health hacks is getting accountability from friends, like get other founder friends and get mentors. Like one of the most important thing a mentor said to me, it's someone that's like way more successful than I am and like has built out, I think he's built 8 companies at this point. He's sold 3 of them. And one day he like looked at me and he's like, you're working too much. And I was like, what do you mean I'm working too much? You're supposed to tell me the opposite of that. You're supposed to be telling me that I'm supposed to be staying up all night. And he's like, no, you need to like take tomorrow off. And what I realized is that getting that permission from someone, even though it's like, you don't have to ask anyone for permission to do stuff, but like getting that permission from someone I respected allowed me to give myself permission to actually take that time off and to actually like reflect on, am I getting really tired? Am I actually being optimal right now? And then from there, what I've kind of realized is like, you need to give yourself permission to do these things unapologetically. So if you're taking the day off and then you spend the whole entire day feeling guilty for taking the day off, you're not actually taking the day off. Like, like you're really just compounding that stress. So like that means that you build out a schedule and you say to yourself, okay, in 2 weeks, I'm going to take like this half day off and this is what I'm going to do. You stick with it. Like regardless, you stick with it and you set that as a goal, just like you would any other metric. And that like significantly improved my mental health once I started doing that. Because if you don't, then it's so easy to say like, oh, well, I'll do it tomorrow. Tomorrow will be my day off, or the day after that, or the day after that, and that doesn't happen. So
yeah, totally. Well, I mean, there's some basics, right? There's some like fundamental questions that are kind of at the very top of mind. It's like, which parts of being a founder are the most stressful?
What stage?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. For me personally, I think it's the uncertainty. You never know, and you're gonna make mistakes, and learning to like let yourself make those mistakes and forgive yourself for the mistakes that you do make. I think that was the thing that stressed me out the most.
Yeah, I would, really echo on that. I think like being a first time founder, being super young, like going into this, ecosystem of just amazing people who, are super, super talented. So the imposter syndrome is really insane. And it really just gets at me a lot of the times where, I sit in rooms sometimes like where I'm like, not just young, but also at the same time, I'm probably the only person of color there. And so it gets really stressful when you don't see people that look like you in the same room. And so like those are some of the things that really kind of stress me out. Is like, oh, I gotta act a certain way, I gotta look smart, I gotta, maybe even talk a certain way so I can, look like I have this like profile of quote unquote entrepreneur. So for me, it's like those things are really big stressors when I don't feel like I'm being myself, or don't feel like I'm in a room where I could be my full self, which is obviously like me being part of me. Like that's really, really important for me to like, bring my full self to a stage or, a meeting room. And so those are some of the things that really stress me out.
Mm-hmm. And you're both solo founders right now? Okay.
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about how that might be even harder? There's no one to point to next to you saying it was their bad idea, right? So like, would love to hear more on that.
You're really onboarding a lot of that stress as a solo founder. You can't really vent to the rest of your team about what's going on. Like you want to maintain a certain level of, well, we're doing this and this is what's happening. And that's why I think the importance really comes with like founder friends and mentors. Like I've probably boxed DM multiple times and been like, yo, I'm having a really bad day and this is why I'm having a bad day. And he's probably done the same to me. And like we kind of have this little ecosystem. You really find people to lean on and they kind of become your like pseudo co-founders, which is really fun actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. it's like you're basically going through the same thing low key, whether you like it or not. And if you if you have those people, I like to have people who are a little bit above me because they've gone through more stress, so they kind of know like sometimes how to help you and what they went through. They can tell you like, look, here's some of the things I did wrong, because most of the time it's like they didn't do anything about it. But when you can figure out what they did wrong, then you can really figure out how you can, turn the thing that they learned into, a solution for yourself. So I really love what Alex just talked about, because that's true. Have founder friends, people that actually understand what you're going through, because if you have people that don't understand, sometimes it gets really, really, really tough, because they'll never really give you advice that you're going to be like, okay, that makes sense. And even the respect from your side of someone who's like giving you advice that have never gone through it kind of is down. It's like, well, you don't really get it. So it's key to find founder friends.
Yeah. Kind of like echoing, sorry.
No, go ahead.
A story that popped in my head. A few months ago when I first started Talk Howdy, I had like one full-time employee, everyone else was outsourced. And she just decided she quit one day, and like everyone knew her, everyone was friends with her too. She went through Techstars with us. And I remember the first person I called was one of my mentors at like 8:30 in the morning, right after she called me, and I was like crying, and he was like, Alex, why are you crying? And he's like, is it because you feel alone? And I was like, yeah, like I feel. And he's like, Alex, you're on the phone with me, you're not alone, you'll never actually be alone in this journey. And he's like, turn your Techstars friends, call me whenever, like, but we're a part of your team. So if you really handle like mentorship well and like your founder friends well, they really do become a part of your team in that whole entire journey.
Totally. So we talked about founders as mentors and like partners in this journey. What role, if any, should investors play in this?
Good question.
That's a good question. I think every founder comes with a different vibe, and I go to them for different things. So there are some like investors that I have that are so open that I know I can really take the things that are a little bit more personal to them, because like we just vibe like that. And there's some like investors that I, like are just like, we'll talk business, we'll talk numbers all day, right? So I think when you're starting to talk to these people, when you started to go fundraising, that's a really important thing to start looking out for, of like, will they care when it's you, like, because you are the business at the end of the day, right? Sometimes some investors might think like, it's all about the business, it's all about the money, the metrics, the KPIs, all these different things. But at the end of the day, will they care about you? And does that vibe really connect? And so, so I have some investors where I can really go and say, look, I'm going through this and I'm going through this, because they've also been part of this journey, most of them really. They would understand and they would really offer some great advice, but just bring people into your tribe, of this investor tribe, you know, if you want to call it that will give you like the space to be able to express yourself.
Alex, any thoughts on it?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that like early stage founders should realize is that an investor relationship lasts longer than the average marriage in the United States. Use your investors wisely. Like, make sure that you're actually working with people you want to work with, not just like for the money. Like, it's really not as much of a financial investment as it is like an emotional investment. It shouldn't be. And so talk to other people in the ecosystem and ask them like, who are founder friendly investors? And then also when you're meeting with these investors, ask them what they'll do for founders. And a lot of the time they'll tell you like, hey, we're going to add you to a Slack channel. We also do these sessions. Like, make sure that they do that on top of just giving you money, because you can get money. Like you can find a check, but really finding people that'll be along for the ride is a lot harder to seek out, but it's way more rewarding also.
Yeah, completely agree. There's like a couple of versions of this, right? There's like, I would like to talk to my investors about my mental health. There's that one, I guess. Yeah. And then there's like, I really don't want to do that. But it'd be cool if you would like, cover my Calm app subscription. so that I can like have somewhere else to go. That'd be nice.
Right.
And like VCs are doing it.
Yeah, it seems like more and more VCs are getting on top of it. It's like incredible. Like we were running these small group chats, and we had VCs reach out to us and ask if we would run chats for them for their portfolio companies. And you start to realize that like it's kind of catching up. I think everyone's a little sick of the whole mentality of like, let's pretend everything's perfect all the time in the startup ecosystem, and let's only highlight when we raise money or when we have like users, because it's just not healthy. It's genuinely not.
Yeah, completely. There's another, like from the investor's point of view, especially in the early stage, like the founding team is like what you're investing in. And they can only go out and solve the problem that their company is trying to solve if they are somewhat squared away when it comes to their mental and physical well-being. And so in that regard, from an investor's point of view, like one of the biggest exposures or risks in investing is like, well, making sure that they're okay. Like, and it's a really interesting thing to consider that when you, for example, like look at a board agenda or like your monthly or biweekly calls with your investors, and the agenda doesn't include anything around like, hey, how you doing? Which is one of the things that I think is super important, is like whether it be that or one-on-ones with your team members, things that are even more like performance based, like OKR meetings. Like when you look at the actual agenda, there should be something there that's like, how are you doing? Not just like, well, how's your North Star? Like, are you performing? Like, it's not all as separate as it seems. It's all very interrelated. Like the performance against a metric is like intertwined with their well-being. So it might as well be on the agenda, you know?
Totally.
Yeah. So switching gears a little bit, and we've got a couple questions from the audience, and we're going to get them. So by the way, if you just joined, we're talking about founder stress, mental health, anxiety, burnout. Drop your questions in the chat. One of the other topics that I think is like really frequently discussed is like hustle in the founder community, and like it's talked about with this like positivity around it. It's like, oh, she's got like so much hustle, and or like he's a bulldog in the boardroom, and then what's like not talked about as much as like maybe it should be, is like stamina. This is not if done right, entrepreneurship is not a like 6-month sprint. It's like a multi-year journey. And I'm curious what you would say about how stamina comes into play as opposed to this like hustle game.
It's a great question. So the only reason why I was even invited to speak on this panel, I think, is because I had this tweet that said, I'm getting way more active on Twitter, but all it said was, I've seen many startups fail because of burnout, but I've never seen a startup fail because the founder took a weekend off.
Yeah.
And like, it's the most accurate thing. Like it's true. It's a long game. And like, if you don't get those processes in place early for how you're going to run your business and run your startup, then like you will fizzle out in 6 months. I've seen it happen multiple times. It's happened to me before with like side projects. And at that point, it's like, if you've ever experienced burnout, you genuinely do feel like useless. Like you want so badly to do something, but you physically cannot bring yourself to do that. I remember Amos Schwartzfarb, the managing director of Techstars Austin, one day we were talking, and he was like, you have to find a business that you're willing to spend the next 10 to 15 years on, like minimum. He's like, and then once you find that problem that drives you for 10 to 15 years, you need to figure out how that you can actually stay running it for 10 to 15 years. And I remember when he first said that to me, I was like, 10 to 15 years, that's wild. And then now I'm like, oh shit, like you're like, yeah, I know it's 10 to 15 years. That makes sense now. Like I'm a year and a half, 2 years into this one, and it makes a ton of sense.
Totally.
Yeah. I just like when you were talking, it just reminded me of Simone Biles this during the Summer Olympics, in 2020 Olympics. Just watching her choose herself, like it was mind blowing to me, because you have this like great athlete. So it's like, if she can do that, like, like we can also do the same thing. When we start to think about all the investors might get mad, or, like I might lose this, like take a weekend off, take a Wednesday off. It's hump day, right? Like when you think of like, just take a Wednesday off and fill up your tank, and really, really rest and go watch, get distracted by something. Cause like, it's really hard sometimes for a founder, cause you feel the guilt is there, cause that's your baby. It's like, damn, I just left my baby at home. I don't know taking care of me. You just left your baby at this daycare center where you don't know like if it's gonna go right or left, or right. But you just give yourself grace and get something to distract you. Get amazing friends. Go out, go have fun, and it's going to be there. I promise. And really, like, unless like there's something crazy going on, but I just really think that it doesn't have to be a Saturday. It doesn't have to be a Wednesday. It could be any day where you just know that your tank is going down, and you have to have that mental awareness of yourself too, to give yourself those signals in your head of like, oh, yeah, it seems like we're nearing the end here, and then fill up the gas tank.
Totally.
It's really interesting that you brought up Simone or Bills, because like I think there's something to say about these humanistic things that we're seeing amongst like celebrities, we're seeing it amongst athletes, we're seeing about like really high power entrepreneurs, where they're saying like, yeah, I want to do a four-day work week now. Like I think what we're going to experience, or what we're maybe experiencing right now, is collective founder burnout, also because of COVID and because of the pandemic, because entrepreneurs are natural problem solvers, right? Like we wouldn't be doing this if we didn't feel like we could solve things that like we are unknown, and we're really used to and are comfortable with like the unknown. So when the pandemic hit, I think a lot of us went to work and kind of like shoved aside all those feelings of the pandemic, and we're like, okay, instead we're going to problem solve around this, because we're so used to uncertainty. So that's our comfort zone. And then now we're a year and a half in, and we're like, oh crap, like I don't know how much I can like solve on that, or I have to ease back into normal life. So I think especially being kind to yourself during this period, where it's this like interesting transition from, we were just all probably problem solving for the last year and a half, and now stuff's opening up in like the real world. I think it's better to like start getting processes in place now, so you don't end up in that.
Yeah, totally. That's actually a question from the audience. Many business owners were working long hours during COVID. New responsibilities include workers not coming because of health reasons or supply chains breaking. How do we add systems into our businesses to strengthen them?
Yeah.
And I think you're talking about that.
I think, personally, I think the systems, if you're talking about remote work, like by new business environment, I don't know exactly what that is like signifying, but remote work wise, finding communities. That's like my whole thing, is like finding online communities, like I've said, like founder friends, mentors, stuff like that, ways to disconnect from work. I'm also a huge proponent, I don't know if people are getting mad at me for saying this, for like 4-day work weeks. Like I think that they've been working really well for a lot of startups now, where we're not designed to be like highly optimal for 5 days a week, and most people I know are not. So I really like the idea of now a lot of founders coming out and saying, hey, we're going to do 4-day work week for like 6 months, or like during this period of time. And it kind of gives people permission to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would also say like make mental health part of your culture. Like embedded. I think when you talk about a system, that's what I think of. Is like really embedded into your system, embedded in your culture, and everybody that you really bring on, make sure that they know. Like if you're a CEO or the hiring manager or whatever, make sure that like they know that that is part of the thing that you guys, or the values that you guys have in your company. And so so when all these things are coming up, COVID, whatever, like it might be COVID today, tomorrow might be something else, but when you have it as part of your system, I think it just makes it a lot easier for the people who are working under you, the people who, yourself as a CEO, to be able to have that open dialogue. How, like I think Dan was saying like earlier, which is like, how are you doing? If the company that doesn't already have a culture or a system that allows for these questions to be asked openly, and for people to feel comfortable to be able to answer these questions openly, then it really doesn't matter. So for me, my biggest thing is like, it might be COVID today, which obviously has hindered all these systems to not work really well. But I feel like if you have a way to catch your employees with mental health resources, like we talked about earlier, pay for your employees calm accounts or subscriptions, to really help them when they're going through this, because it's not just work, it's family, it's friends, and all these other things that are going on around them that might overwhelm them to not really do their best at work. And so giving people grace is really awesome. And then also building a system inside your company to allow for that growth, to allow for that person to be vulnerable, is also really important.
Yeah. I mean, as a leader, as a founder, you have to like explicitly encourage your teams to be open. And you do that by like doing it yourself, right? It's like,
Yeah.
man, I am not doing well today. Just being honest. Like, that's okay. I think we're seeing this change like over the past couple of years in sports, like getting back to Simone Biles. Like one of the approaches in sports that it's just like rapidly changing is this this notion of like being mentally tough and like yelling and like shaming people who like make mistakes. And that's like a coaching thing that you see like in college football sometimes. It's kind of getting turned on its head a little bit, where you got sports psychologists now that are beginning to gain traction with their message that's like, hey, coaches who actually don't do that have athletes that perform better. And like what you're really doing by creating these like high stress low forgiveness environments is like making people afraid to take risks. And I mean, that's kind of what we're all here to do in startup world. So if you're somewhat hampered in your ability to like, or your comfort around like taking risks, then you may end up like making different decisions with your startup that may be like suboptimal. And I think that there's some CEOs that like are out there like doing this pretty well, that are open about stuff they're dealing with personally. And I'm also seeing like the community accept that and respond to it. You see examples of like some VCs even will step in and be like temporary CEO when a founder is dealing with something. Typically you see that with like a physical condition. But more and more it's like, no, I'm stepping in for a little bit, like maybe 3 months, because the founder just like needed a break. And I think that's a huge shift in mentality around this. So yeah, and I think that starts with like creating a space to talk about it. Like the actual founder being like, man, I am underwater right now. Yeah.
I couldn't help but think about the like Bo Burnham thing where it's like, how are you doing tonight? Like, I am not doing good. That's all I was thinking about.
I mean, there's this not to like, so within the Army, you can be like the baddest dude in all the land, and there's this concept that they take from sports called taking a knee. And they've taken it from sports and applied it to your career in the Army, where like if you are going through anything, you can, I mean, you literally call it taking a knee, and they will re-job you basically. And that's really cool to think about, being a part of like a unit that's like, special forces. I need a desk job for a little bit. And they're like, cool. Yeah, that sounds good, man. No problem. That is not a concept in founder land. You are not able to necessarily or easily, I should say, just like, I'm going to take a knee.
But I almost wonder if like if you offer that same grace to your employees and like create a culture, kind of like what DM was saying around being communicative around those things, I actually do think your team will step up for you in those instances too, because you're facilitating a place where like people can come to you in case they're going through something personal, and then when it happens to you, they view you as a leader who's also human, and they say, okay, well, it's my turn to step up. It's happened to me a couple times, and it worked out fine. Like,
yeah, you have to, I mean, to get back to building systems, maybe this is what you have to build a system that enables you to take a knee, essentially.
Yeah.
I think that kind of makes you force yourself to reconsider what your and your employees' productivity means to your business model, especially for like tech-enabled startups. If you're a venture-backed startup, your VC is looking for like 100x return, right? And if you find that your work absence or like a team member's work absence or PTO like significantly hurts your metrics or your company, that's not really like a people problem as much as it is like a systems problem, or like perhaps there's some serious shortcomings or bugs in your software that if they like persist will definitely lead to like high employee turnover, your own burnout. Maybe you find yourself like always pep talking your employees, trying to get them to like basically not quit. And the thing about that is like grinding is not good for you. And it's also not even what your investors want to see. Like, you're not going to grind your way to 100x return. You have to create the systems for scale needed to reach that. Like they're not going to applaud you as you wear yourself down to the point where you can't produce. So
yeah.
What about? Let's see. We've got some great audience questions here. Let's see. So many. Gosh. We've talked about so many of these. I'm trying to think of a topic we haven't covered. Do y'all have like a specific community or an actual like Slack group, or other than a closed one, like that might be open or available to founders who are looking for one?
I'm like, wow, do I have a website for you? So what we do with Howdy is we aggregate all the communities from all over the internet and put them into a vertical search. So we have over 7,000 founder communities on there right now. Everything from founders communities to developer communities to venture capital communities, marketing for founders of color, female founders, everything that you could ask for. If you go to the website, it's just talkhowdy.com. You'll be able to search through all those. And honestly, I use it. Like, I mean, I built a product that I use, big surprise, but like, it's really nice to go through there and then find a few communities that resonate most, and then join a few of them and like kind of understand what's going on inside of them. Like, what's the vibe? Who's it best for? And we're going to hopefully be building up more tools that allow you to see that at a high level soon. But I think that's the best way to do it, is just join a few of them, see which one sticks best for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would also add, like, I did a lot of like pitch competitions, fellowships, like applying to stuff, because once you get in, you find this other new tribe of other entrepreneurs, although you might be competing against each other, like through that, you like meet so many friends, so many other people, like colleagues that you can really go through this journey with you. So especially like, for the younger entrepreneurs, like, future founders, these head streams, there's so many fellowships that are looking for entrepreneurs to be, to get mentors. I've done a lot of that, and I've met some of my best friends came from that, joining accelerators. Like I met Alex from that, right? And so I think like you can really build a company while building your tribe too at the same time. I think that's it doesn't have to be two separate things. It could be like the same thing. So go find people. Don't isolate yourself inside, I'm just grinding, like Dan was saying. Really go find other entrepreneurs, maybe doing the same thing, or doing different things, going to competitions, joining fellowships and applying to those things, because it's really, really going to help you find another tribe of people who are, quote unquote, hustling like you.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's huge. Is it's kind of counterintuitive. You think, I don't have time. I'm so busy. I can't make room in my day for me, like what recharges my batteries is like helping other founders. It's not a exhaustive exercise for me. I really get energized by it. And so it's kind of, you want to say, I don't have time to do that anymore. I got too much going on. Like I got my own problems. I need my own help. But I blocked my Friday from like 3 to 5 to have like 15, 30-minute like sessions with anyone who needs them or wants them. And I mean, I hope that I'm providing them value, but really, like, that's for me. Like, I want to like make sure that I have that time in my day, because I know that that's the thing that like recharges my batteries. So maybe that's the question, is like, how do you think about carving out time to do what you feel like recharges your batteries?
Yeah.
So what do we do to recharge our batteries?
Yeah, like I guess, what do you do, but more importantly, like, how do you make sure that you do it, like that you have time for it?
Yeah, so I have a few things I do. If I can't get which I just saw in the chat here, like this to-dos out of my head, I watch a really awesome movie. Like if it's so good, it's gonna get you out of it. Like if it's so good, find a really good movie, find a really funny movie, and just watch that. Like watch that. We live in Texas. Every apartment, every house, I just learned they got a pool. Go to the pool and chill out. Read a book. Read a book. Like if you had any like childhood cartoons that you loved, go watch Phineas and Ferb, right? Like, so I just do these like random things to just really align myself to, to go back to that little kid, right? Everybody has a little kid in them. Bring out the little kid to go explore, go have some adventures, because I know the adult might be really mad in there, but just allow yourself to have that, like that energy again that you had as a little kid. Because I understand like to-dos can really get to you, but if you just watch or find something to distract you, will help you a lot. I like to paint, so I don't know how to paint, by the way. I just have this canvas. I'm like, I don't plan what I'm gonna do there. I'm like, red sounds cool. School, and it turns out it's like, look, it's abstract. It don't really matter, but I just created something out of nothing, and that's beautiful, right? And so I try to do many things. I make beats. I love music, so I just DJ, do my own party with my headphones, and so I just do these things that I know I really love. And now, actually, part of this, I'm really trying to add in a workout. Like, I want to go work out. So if I know I'm got to-dos, right? So I can get in there and I think about my to-dos, but I'm also just having fun, working out and getting a little bit more healthy. But yeah, so that's what I do, at least. That's my operating system. And I also have this like thing where it's like non-negotiables, like Saturdays, I got to have at least 6 hours to 8 hours of just myself. I need that because, Sunday I'll talk to people and all these things, but I just got to have a day where it's just, I'm just chilling with me and, like really in my peace. So that's another thing I do there to help.
I think this plays a lot off the question that just came in, is how do you turn your mind off and relax? It's often so difficult to block the to-dos out of your head. So I'm really bad at watching TV and watching movies, because that's like me. I feel like I constantly have to be doing stuff. I'm not a good relaxer. Like, you put me next to a pool, I'll work, which kind of sucks, but that's like the reality of it. What I've realized works best for me, hanging out, as much as I love my founder friends, hanging out with people that have nothing to do with the industry that I'm in. Literally, like my friends that are artists, or my friends that are chefs, or my friends that do not understand tech are some of my favorite people to hang out with when I want to recharge, because we don't talk about work. If I tried to talk to them about work, they'd be like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah.
So it's great. The other thing is doing something, like being active, like DM was saying, like going to the park, going on walks. I also really like cooking, doing things like with my hands, or an activity that kind of like pings a different part of my brain that's not work related.
Yeah.
I find that if I'm focused on a different task, it helps me not think about work tasks. So like cooking, baking, doing pottery, stuff like that, or any other types of challenges. It really can take me out of like, okay, my work brain versus like my fun brain. And then it ends up being a really good time and a great way to recharge.
Totally.
Yeah, so it's like, everybody's obviously different, right? And so it's just like all about you creating your own operating system. I kind of, that's something that I've started to call this. And once you figure out that operating system, it doesn't really end there. It's something you refine over and over, because, you're never going to stay the same. And so, I might have what I do, right? Like, but, for someone else, they might be more, like Alex was just saying, like she's more like, I gotta do stuff. I gotta distract my hands. And when my hands are going, my mind is thinking about if I'm making this macaroni and cheese looking really good, right? So I would think about it like that. Like, what is the things that distract you, that can really, like, that you're passionate about, that distract you? If you don't have it, time to go explore. Maybe that's the next mission that you have, to go explore, find something that you love. And it might be hopping on Talk Howdy to find a group that's not entrepreneurs, right? It might be finding a group of people who just love chess or love Dungeons and Dragons or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Find that tribe that might not talk about entrepreneurship, because sometimes as entrepreneurs, we're guilty of that. Like, so like you really are itching to ask, like, how's that little problem? And now we bring that problem in, and now, it's like this atomic bomb, and now everybody's stressed, right? And so find those people that, are not going to be talking about these topics sometimes is really going to help. So I really love how to just put that in.
Yeah. I mean, the underlying thing here is like, you are not your startup.
Yeah.
Like,
oh yeah. That's a great one.
And it's funny, the thing about realizing that is it makes you kind of perform better sometimes in your startup than if you were like all consumed. You make decisions differently. If you're like, literally, this is my identity, you'll decide things differently. And I always appreciate like super well-known founders that are on Twitter that, like, there's nothing on their Twitter that would indicate anything about their company. It's like, I like dogs. You're like, heck yeah, man, that's cool. So you're not your startup, even though you may feel like it at times, which is kind of funny because, we're saying find a community of founders, and also like leave that community.
Well, there's like two different things. I actually just met with a coach last week who's phenomenal. His name's Michael Baldwin on Twitter, if y'all know him. And he asked me, he's like, oh, so like, tell me about yourself. And I told him all about my work history. And at the end of it, he looks at me and goes, I didn't ask you about your work. I asked you about you. Yeah. And I was like, oh, crap. Like, that's a great point. And so like I think what you just said, we're like, you're not your startup. You're really like, your startup can fail tomorrow from circumstances that you don't even know about, because you probably could never foresee them. It happened to me with my first business. And if you don't set those pillars around you, then like it genuinely does like mentally crush you. So make sure that you are focusing on other things. Like, sure, have your founder friends, all about the founder friends, but also play Dungeons and Dragons. If that's what gets you going and that's what you enjoy, like, yeah, join that community too.
Yeah, totally. I met someone over Zoom the other day, and I was like, "Hey, it's great to meet you." And they were like, they didn't ask me what I did. They were like, "What do you like to do?" I was like, "Whoa."
Great question.
I was like,
You
"Wow."
only realize how boring you are when someone asks you what you do for fun, and then you're like, oh crap.
Yeah.
What do I do?
We got a couple minutes left. Now's a good time. DM Alex, if you have any closing concepts or remarks or things you want the audience to know, this is a great time to do it.
Man, I feel like there's so many amazing things that got brought up. My top ones I think are like, don't make your identity your startup. Hell yeah, Dan. Totally agree. Yeah, I'm like, find an operating system that works best for you. That might look a lot different than what your friends or what Twitter tells you or what everything else tells you. Find a community of people that just understand what you're going through. And then I had a fourth one that I really liked, but I don't remember what it is at this very moment.
That's enough. That's a lot of work right there. That's good stuff. DM, what's up? 1 minute.
Yeah. I think the fourth one is finding a community of people who don't get you, so you can think about other things, like the Dungeons and Dragons thing, right? But yeah, like I really truly believe like building a system as a CEO or, like even if you're someone that works for a company, bringing these things up in the meetings and saying, look, like what are we doing for mental health in our company, and being able to set up those systems. So it's like a fail safe really, like for you as a founder, and all the people who are working to bring this organization up. If you don't have like mental health resources for your people, like that's the first place to start to look, because if you don't have, as a CEO, if you don't have the things that, this operating system I was talking about that keeps you sane, it might turn into a problem, and then that problem, starts to rot the other, because they're going to know. People are going to know you're going through it. So just be vulnerable. The more vulnerable you are, the more that other people also are going to be vulnerable and come to you and really tell you what's going on. So that I think is a really, really important thing. Make mental health part of your system, part of your KPIs, maybe. Just don't stress it.
Totally. Love it. We're at time. This was awesome. Would love to chat with y'all more offline. It's great to meet you. Y'all already know each other, but this is new for me. So y'all are awesome. You're both building really cool things. Congratulations on what you've built so far. Looking forward to seeing what you build in the future. And with that, I think we're wrapped, and we can go about our days and put time on our calendar to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves, literally on your G calendar.
Well, thanks, Dan. Thanks for moderating for us.
Thanks, everyone. That was great. And we are going to be talking about 5 ways to build repeatability into your business. Amos Schwartzfarb, Managing Director of Techstars and co-author of the book Levers, is going to be leading on today's session. We'll be talking about a lot of super important fundamentals to building your business at whatever stage. So hopefully everyone took my advice and brought a notebook and a pen or pencil, because there will be lots of notes to be taken. So yeah, if you want to bring up to the stage Amos, and we can go ahead and get started. Hi.
What up, Caroline? How you doing today?
Good. Also, Amos is my other half at Techstars, so I'm really excited he's here on screen and, going to be chatting about his now best-selling book, which is also great. So yeah, you can all get your copy at leversbook.com if you like the content. And yeah.
Hi. Thanks, Caroline. And it's awesome to see you. And everybody, welcome to Startup Week 2021, one of the most awesome weeks of the year here in Austin. So we're going to take 45 minutes today just to go to really skim the surface of what I believe are sort of the 5 most important and fundamental things to building any business, and maybe equally or more importantly, building repeatability into your business, which means, great, I have an idea and I can do something, but how do I know that I can do it and get to a point where I'm on wash, rinse, repeat, and then scale and grow and reach our maximum potential? So we'll take about 45 minutes today. I'm going to keep my eyes on the clock. Normally this takes somewhere between an hour and 5 or 7 years to go through. So there is a lot of information here. If anybody wants more information afterwards, you can pick up the book, of course, at leversbook.com. You can try to reach out to us directly, and we'll try to be helpful as well. So let's jump right in. We can go to the next slide. And I'm having some help today because I had some technical difficulties. Thank you, Hallie, for helping me with the slides today. So one of my core beliefs in building big, sustainable, long-term, awesome businesses is that you really need to be metrics driven. And my experience, both as being an operator and as an investor in well over 100 companies, is the most successful businesses, the ones that stand the test of time, they figure out how to use data and metrics to help inform their intuition so that they can get to that repeatability. And so that's really what we're going to talk about today, is how do you get there and what are the things that you need to do. Let's go to the next slide. And I realize I'm going a little bit fast. I'll try to slow it down, but I want to make sure we cover everything. So what we're going to do today, and it's a little bit different than what you see in the slide, but I'm going to get into this slide in just a second. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the 5 frameworks that we use. And the way that I think about it, it's really 5 steps that are all about data and metrics and understanding how to use those in order to get to repeatability in your business. However, it's really important, it's why we're starting with this slide, that you have to have a vision. Without a vision, it's really hard to figure out what you're actually going to build your business around, right? So think about this as what you picture the world will look like if you are successful at scale. Don't worry about like actually impacting the world. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the world that you're trying to impact. So if you're, if you're creating a new kind of pants for men to wear both to work and hiking, like one of our companies lives in, the world that you're trying to affect are a very specific type of individual that might wear these pants, right? Or if you're creating a new kind of marketing automation system, you're trying to help companies that would need this type of marketing automation system. So think about the world that you're trying to impact in the future at some point. So it's really important to have, at least in your mind, a clear picture of what that is. It doesn't mean that you have to be able to articulate it perfectly clearly on day one. And I would argue it's really hard to do that because there's lots of moving pieces. But have an idea of what that picture is in your head so that you can start to articulate it. And when you can do that, everything else that we're going to talk about today starts to fall into place. When it's hard for you to do that, it's hard for everyone else on your team, which translates to also investors and also your customers, to fully comprehend what it is you're trying to do. And more importantly, how do you actually get there? Cool? Awesome. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So like I said, there's going to be 5 steps to what we're talking about today. The steps are going to be understanding your customer, understanding your business model, understanding how to prioritize the things you're working on, figuring out how do you measure those things, and then how do you create a plan around those things. And the way that I think about it is in that order specifically. So while everything we're talking about today, you literally can pluck out and use these frameworks as individual standalone things, they're much more impactful when you put them all together and when you put them together in this way, starting with, I have a vision of what the world might look like one day. The first step is saying, okay, well, if I believe that I have this vision of the future, who is it that I want to impact? And how do I know whether or not I'm right? Like in my gut, I feel like I'm right. I'm driven by this. I'm obsessed with solving this problem. But how can you start to gather information to know that you're right and that the customer image that you have in your head is actually the right customer image? Or is it something, slightly different or very different than what you believe is? And how do you get there? And how do you get to some level of repeatability? And so the framework that I use and that we use in Techstars Austin is understanding the answer to these 3 questions. But not just like if you're a founder, you read these questions like, oh, I can answer these questions. It'll take me 30 seconds to answer these questions, 45 seconds to answer these questions. While that is true, what I want to really encourage you to do is not to just answer them, but then to go out and collect the information that suggests you're actually right, that your intuition lines up with the data that's true. Okay, so the three questions are, and on the next slide, I'm going to give you a little bit of an example of each, but the three questions are what you're seeing here. Who do you believe your customer is? And try to be really, really narrow and specific, especially in the early days. And what I like to say is, if you know you've nailed it, when you get a yes 100% of the time. Now, that doesn't mean that every conversation you have is going to end up in a yes, because you're learning all along the way. And as you scale, it doesn't mean that every single customer that you believe is right is actually the right customer for you and that they're going to say yes. But your goal should be that if you have all of the correct attributes of who you believe your customer is, they should say yes 100% of the time. And so that's a goal that you should be aspiring to reach. And I'll give you an example on the next slide when we get there. The second thing is, what are they buying from you? Not what are you selling to them? And again, I'm going to give you an example on the next slide, but the notion I want to put in your head is, nobody cares what you do. I'm sorry to say, nobody cares what you do. What they do care about is what you do for them. And so you should think about that as you're engaging with your potential customers. What are you doing for them? Who are they, and what are you doing for them? And very closely related to what are you doing for them is, why are they buying your product? What does it do for their business? And the way that you'll know is when they can articulate how they will measure that. And even if you're in a B2C company, an app where they're engaging around music or some social interaction, they may not quantify it in the way a B2B customer will, but if you have a conversation with them, you can listen for the cues around how it's impacting, them emotionally in some way, right? What's the energy that they're getting from the thing that you're providing to them? And specifically to B2B, there's actually two whys. There's why is the business buying? And then why is the individual buying? And those things don't always line up. And when they don't line up, it actually tells you something about your who today. Maybe not tomorrow, but today. So let's go to the next slide. I'm going to give you examples for all three of these. Okay. So for who, a bad example of a definition of who is, I sell to the healthcare industry, or I sell to hospitals in the healthcare industry. Like if you come to me and say, hey, can you connect me with hospitals to sell my product to? Like, it doesn't really tell me anything. Like what kind of hospital? Like, who's the buyer in the hospital? Like, tell me a little bit about the buyer, right? So maybe a little bit better definition is like, we sell to private hospitals, with under 1,000 employees. Like, okay, that tells me something, but still, I don't really know if the connection that I'm going to make for you would be the right connection. The kind of definition, the kind of specificity that helps you get to a deep, deep understanding of who your customer is something like, we sell in the healthcare industry, to private hospitals with under 1,000 employees. Our typical buyer is the director of IT, and has been in the job for at least less than a year, but has been in the industry for more than 5. That they have a budget approval of up to $100,000. They're currently using 3 different legacy softwares that we can replace all 3. And the buyer's job core is to improve operating margin by finding technical efficiencies. So you see the difference there. It's really specific, and you can get down to the nitty gritty of what this person's job is and how what you're doing lines up with their job. For what? Really simple example. And again, no one cares what you do. They care what you do for them. So think about this. If you use Google in order to drive sales to customers to your business, you don't wake up in the morning going, I'm so pumped to go buy search, right? That is the mechanism that you're using. But what you're actually doing is you're saying, I'm pumped to figure out how to get more customers from Google. You're buying customers from them, or you're buying revenue from them. You're buying research from them. You're buying something from them. You're not buying search. You don't take search, put it in your pocket, and do something with it. So think about that little nuance, because that little nuance is really important, and the difference between someone potentially having or not having an emotional connection with what you're actually going to do to help their life become easier. And then the why. Are you driving profit? Are you driving margin? Are you creating a time efficiency? Why do they care? And if it's a B2B sale specifically, why does the business care? And why does the individual care? So you may be able to drive 20% increase in revenue, but if that individual isn't also incentivized to build revenue, right? Like if they're just salaried and they don't get a bonus and they're not going to get a raise by driving more revenue, however, you will be creating more work for them. What's their incentive to do it? So it may tell you that either this isn't the right customer right now, or you have to find a different way to understand how this buyer might be incentivized. So let that sink in for 10 seconds, and then we'll move to step 2. And Haley, skip the next slide and go 2 slides. You'll see where it says step 2. Awesome. Okay, so step 2 is once you have an idea of what your customer is, who your customer is, and you have an idea of the data that you need to go collect in order to go figure that out. The next is, what's your business model? I like to think of this as finding your revenue formula. And so I'm going to show you an example of this on the next slide, but what you can try to picture in your mind is quite literally a math equation, a simple math equation, A times B times C times D equals revenue. That's the thing that ultimately, when you've figured out repeatability in your business, you will have a revenue formula that looks something like that. And you'll understand how to move the values in your revenue formula. And the way you move the values in the revenue formula, and you'll see an image on the next slide, is the drivers and the sub-drivers. And these are all the things that you need to do, prove, build, think about in order to figure out how do you get repeatability in your revenue formula. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll give you some examples of all this. So on this slide, I realize I'm going fast, everyone. We got about 17 minutes left, so I want to make sure I cover it all. The top line, visits times coverage times conversion rates times CPC equals revenue. And I'm going to give you an example. This is for a business that I was a part of many years ago called business.com. Your businesses may look very, very different than this, but I just want to use it as a descriptor so that in your mind, you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. For business.com, visits was the number of people that showed up on a business.com website on any page. Doesn't matter what they did. If they showed up, that was the number of visits. Coverage was whether or not there was something in order that visitor was able to engage with. So let's just say that visitor was doing a search for credit card processing machines. If they showed up on a page and there was no information about credit card processing machines, we had 0 coverage. If that page had something about credit card processing machines, then it would have some coverage. And then for us, we actually had an ideal number, which I think at the time was 7. We had to have at least 7 pieces of content on that page to optimize engagement. Again, something that we learned, which would have been one of the drivers or sub-drivers. So visits, number of people that show up, coverage, whether there was something that they can actually engage with. Conversion rate was whether or not they actually engaged with the content on that page. So someone shows up, they see something on that page, they engage with something on that page. CPC, some of you may be familiar with this, cost per click. That's how we got paid. So if someone engaged with a piece of content on that page, there was some amount of revenue associated with each click. That might be 0, it might be $100, but some amount of revenue was associated with that click, and then we would be paid for that. So if we had 1 visit and they showed up on a page and there was something for them to engage with, and they engaged with it, and it was $1 CPC, then we made $1. So you can see how that math equation at scale tells me the health of the business at a very top line. If you look at the boxes that are underneath it, you'll notice at the top of every box, there's a bolded, and it's probably really hard to read, but a bolded word. Those are your drivers. So under visits, there's direct, paid, PR, radio, and trade shows. Under each bolded line, those are your sub-drivers. So for example, for direct, there's SEO, email, blogging, Twitter, LinkedIn. These are just examples. So this gives you everything that you need to do, think about, build, research in order to figure out whether or not your revenue formula is the right revenue formula and how to get it to some level of repeatability. So let's think about that for a second before we move on to step 3. We've got all this information that we need to go learn about who we think our customer is, right? That's who we're trying to serve. We've got all this information about how we're going to serve them and make money by serving them. That's your revenue formula. There's a whole bunch of things that you need to go do, build, research, think about before you can actually get your business to repeatability. So that brings us to step 3. So Hallie, if you can skip the next slide and go 2 slides ahead. Thank you. So this is how do you take all that information and actually do something with it so that you know what to do now or next. And the exercise, we call it validating your assumptions. And essentially what it does is it helps you lay out all of these things. And as you go through this exercise, what everyone always realizes is like, oh, we missed some stuff. That's great. That's part of the exercise. What did we miss? What are the assumptions that we have in the business today? And what do we know that is already validated, which is what is the data to prove you're right? What is not yet validated, which means you should be doing something to validate it before you build anything. And then also what is high priority and low priority. So let's go to the next slide, Hallie. When you complete the exercise, it gives you something like this. So it breaks all of the things from W3, from figuring out who your customer is, all of the things from revenue formula, and then some new things that pop up as you go through this exercise. It tells you all of your assumptions, and it breaks it down into one of the 4 quadrants. So anything that's high priority and validated, these are the things that you're building that are part of your day-to-day business. These are the things you're getting closer to or maybe have repeatability on already. They can change over time, but that's what you know today. All of your high priority unvalidated assumptions, these are the things that you're really excited to go build and do. And in reality, you shouldn't actually do anything until you get some level of validation and move it into your validated high priority assumptions so you can start to build and do. So the unvalidated high priority, this is where you're spending a lot of your time researching and then eventually moving it into validated so that you can start to build or execute against it. And anything that falls below the line, which is not high priority or low priority, you shouldn't be working on. And so if you pick up your head and you're like, oh, I'm working on 1, 2, 10 things in the low priority, you have to ask yourself why, and then say, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it actually is high priority. Or are you doing it because it's simple and yeah, it's got to get done, but is it really going to impact your business in the short term or long term for that matter? Awesome. Hallie, let's move again 2 slides ahead. Okay. So step 1, bunch of information around figuring out who your customer is. Step 2, a bunch of information around figuring out what your business model is and how do you get to repeatability on it. Step 3, taking all of that information and figuring out what do I do now and what do I do next. So great, you leave step 3 going, great, I know exactly where I need to go spend my time. I need to go research this. I need to go build this. I need to go execute on this. I have repeatability here and I should put my foot down on the gas there. That's great. But how do you know if you're right? And I would be shocked if there's anyone on this call who hasn't heard the expression KPIs or key performance indicators before. This is how you measure the health of your business. In this framework, you really should be thinking about KPIs, the I as the critical thing, the indicator that you are onto something. And the way that we think about it is, what does it unlock for you? Which means, while some of your KPIs may also be lagging indicators, they should always be leading indicators. So if you say, for example, our number 1 KPI is revenue, I will hit the buzzer and say, wrong. Revenue tells you what you already did, but what does it unlock for you? What are the things that lead you to revenue? So you're looking for the things that will help you learn how to get to more revenue and how to get to repeatability in your revenue. So yes, of course, revenue is important, but revenue is a lagging indicator of whether or not the business is actually working or not. By the time you have or don't have revenue, something is already working or not working. And if you don't know what that is, you won't be able to find repeatability to do more of it or less of it if it's not working. So let's go to the next slide. And again, I can tell how fast I'm going, so I apologize to all of you. But again, the book's out there and we do workshops on it. So there's other ways to engage. There's a lot of different frameworks for KPIs out there. The one that we've created, I'm going to sneeze. Hold on a second. Maybe I can make it go away. Okay, went away. The one that we've created for the levers process is specific to all the steps leading up to it. So it allows you to very quickly identify if these are the unvalidated or validated high priority things. How do we measure whether or not the thing that we're doing is actually working. And more importantly, and always, no matter what the stage, I don't care if you're a $10 billion business, but especially in the early days, what does that unlock for you to be able to do next? So if I learn, for example, I'll give you a really easy example. If I learn that by creating more sales demos, I'm able to drive more, and this is going to seem really obvious, but it's the how do you do it, more customers into the contract phase. Well, then I have to figure out what are the things that I can do to achieve my sales demo goal. It's not just picking up the phone and calling more people. Like that might do it, but that's not necessarily the more efficient way. So in this example, it might be going back to who is my customer and how do I measure whether or not that's right. And so you're always looking for, okay, if I do this thing, if I achieve this goal, if I'm able to get more sales demos, what does it unlock for me? Well, it unlocks the ability to move more people into the contract phase. If I move more people into the contract phase, what does it unlock for me? Well, it allows more people to move into the customer phase, et cetera, et cetera. And so think about that. You can extrapolate that out from just driving more customers, but even into product development, into marketing, into every aspect of your business. Whatever I'm doing, what does it unlock for me next? And that is the thing you want to measure. The ultimate dashboard that you will eventually look at is going back to your revenue formula. That's your high level dashboard, but those aren't your KPIs. That is the overall health of your business. But how do you move those numbers? That's what we're striving for here. Okay. Haley, let's skip the next slide again and go 2 more. Okay. So the one of the things that I love about the levers process, and there's a lot of things that I really do love about it, but one of the things that I love about it most is it's a little bit of a sneaky way to give you all of the things that you need to have at your fingertips in order to create a financial model and pull out of your financial model a plan of what you're actually going to go do. But the key here is not just like to build it because Amos said to build it or someone else said to build it. I want to step back and give you an idea of what a financial model should be for you at any stage of the business, but especially at an early stage. And I will tell you that if you would have asked me this question 6, 7, 8 years ago, I would have said, if you're just starting a company, don't bother building a financial model. It's not going to do you any good. I have completely changed my tune on that. And here's why. A financial model gives you the mechanics. It's 2 reasons. It will give you the mechanics of how you think your business is going to work and a framework in order to start to test and prove whether you're right or wrong. So that's number one. The second reason is that your financial model over time, even from day one, is really a crystal ball. And over time, that crystal ball becomes less and less cloudy. So if I'm sitting in a coffee shop and I've got an idea for a new business and I haven't done anything, I haven't written a line of code, I haven't found the co-founder, I'm just sitting here with this idea, and I go out and go through this process, the levers process from beginning to end, and build a financial model, it actually gives me a blueprint, a really, really cloudy crystal ball of what I think the future is going to look like. And over time, if you use this correctly, it will start to be less and less cloudy. And this is why, if you look at public companies, they're able to at such a great scale, most of the time, do a really good job of forecasting things like earnings. And what you'll learn is, if you followed public markets at all, when things don't go to what their projections are, there is something outside of the model, something that is different than how they've modeled it, that has impacted what they originally believed to be true, which is the same thing that happens to a startup, except that at an early stage company, there are usually way more things that you have less visibility into. But things happen. Something can happen with the supply chain. Something can happen with a global pandemic. Something can happen with a new customer coming into the market, or a change in people's behaviors. So I really want to emphasize here that I have become a huge believer early on in building financial models, not because it's going to be right, but because it gives you the ability to have a really clear picture of what you believe the mechanics of your business will look like and the beginning of a crystal ball. So I'm going to go back through everything and explain how to, in very quick detail, how to think about building the financial model and then how to extract your plan from it. And I'm reminded, I thought we had till 10:45, we have to 11. So I'm going to slow down my talking just a little bit. So when you think about who I believe my customer is, there's a whole bunch of assumptions that go into that, including how are you going to engage with them? How are you going to find them? What does the sales process actually look like? How long is it going to take? How expensive is it going to be? It forces you to think about all these things and I believe in an assumption-driven financial model in your assumptions tab. Same thing with your revenue formula. What do I believe is the way we're going to make money? And what are all of the nuances that are going to go along into whether or not we're able to do that, to find repeatability? This all goes into your assumptions tab. You're validating your assumptions. This also goes into not just your assumptions tab, but in the way that you build out the week by week, month by month, and even to some degree the year by year in the early days of the things you're going to go do and how they might impact the business. And think about your KPIs. This is how you're going to be able to measure whether or not you're on the right track to the mechanics of your model actually working, so that you don't get to the end of a month or the end of a quarter or the end of the year and you look back and say, oh, I guess that didn't work. You'll start to learn how to be able to predict long in advance whether or not you're on the right track. So the really cool thing about building all of those four pieces before you sit down and try to build a financial model is that it essentially gives you, like 90% of all of the information that you're going to need in order to sit down and actually build the model. So you've done the work. You could almost think of it like a bunch of workbooks. And even if you're really, really, really proficient in building financial models, it still is a big, big undertaking. It still might take you 15 or 20 hours of work to go do, even though you've done a lot of the root work to it, because you learn a whole bunch about what you thought how the business was going to work versus how it's actually going to work. And if you're not super versed in building financial models, it might take you longer. It might take you, 25, 30 or more hours to build it over the course of a week or 2 weeks or whatever. But what I can promise you is that when you do that, you will finish that, and you're never finished, but you will finish that version of it, and be able to say, okay, I now have a really, really deep understanding of how I believe my business will work. Good chance you're not right. For a long, long time, but over time, more and more of those pieces are right. And so this is where the framework really comes into play, which is you have the model. From that model literally tells you your plan, right? So you've built the model, you assume that this product is going to drop here and it's going to have this impact on the business. And so we need to build it in this time frame. And then you can monitor against it. Are you hitting those milestones? And then let's say you hit those milestones. Okay. So you drop the product feature at a certain time. Did it have the impact on the business over the same time period that you thought it was going to have? And you can, fill that in. And so you've got your assumptions page where you can continually adapt those assumptions to the things that you're learning, the things that are possible. Well, we thought our sales cycle was going to be 3 months. It turns out it's only 1 month, but we thought our price per customer was going to be $1,000 a month. And it turns out it's only $300 a month, right? And you can adjust these assumptions all along, and it'll change throughout your whole model, turning your model into a crystal ball over time that gets more and more clear or less and less cloudy. So you can extract it. But the key to using this well is that you're constantly going back and saying, here are the things we're working on, looking at them and saying, okay, how on a week by week basis, what are we learning? How is it the same or different than what we thought was going to be true? And how do we use that over time to get more and more tight on how we're actually building our business? And so the last thing I'll say, and then we're going to move into some questions, is the thing about this process that I also love is that it is not a one and done. So when you do this, what I usually tell companies is it's in the early days, you're probably revisiting it every quarter, certainly every 6 months. It gets easier and faster to do it over time. The model building, because a lot of times you're going to have to start that over from scratch because it's going to change so much. But the other pieces, they start to move faster. Now, there's a couple of other benefits that I haven't touched on, and I intentionally held them to the end. When you're able to do this, and when you're able to do this as a senior team, whether there's 2 of you or 5 of you or 8 of you or whatever the number is, the other benefits are, one, you become really tightly aligned on exactly what you're doing, why you're doing it, and who is supposed to do what by when. It becomes really, really clear to have alignment across the entire team, and really entire company. So it gives you a lot of clarity around alignment. It also helps to create a common language inside of your company, built from the top down, meaning from the leadership team down, on how you talk about the things you're doing, why you're doing them, how they're doing. And obviously it gives you a metrics framework so you can build a metrics driven team. And the last thing, and Trevor, who's one of my co-authors on the book, we joke about this. I like to say it gives you more control of your business, and he likes to say it makes you feel less out of control. The reason he says that is because, as we all know, building a company is really hard, and everything always feels like it's completely out of control. So this helps you feel a little bit less out of control because you have much greater alignment, much greater clarity, and a common way for everyone to talk about the same things and move in the same direction. So now's a great time if people have questions, and I see one already that I'm about to read and answer. But if you have questions, please definitely share them. And we've got about 11, 12 more minutes that we can go through. So the question is, how much iteration did you do on these revenue formulas, drivers, sub-drivers as you built the business? It's a really long process. And it's different from business to business. What I usually tell people that, come through Techstars or that I'm teaching this to separately is that it's more important in the early days to have an opinion of what you believe to be true versus being right. So you should not be striving to be right. You should have a strong opinion of what you believe to be true. At business.com, and just to give you some context, business.com was founded, I think, in 1998. I joined in 2004. We figured out a couple of things, particularly our W3 and our revenue formula in middle of 2005. We were about 7 million in revenue in 2005. By 2007, we were 80 million in revenue. It took us a really, really long time to get there and a lot of iteration. And once we figured it out, it was quite literally the hockey stick that you dream about. But it does take a long time. For some companies, longer than others. I think one of the reasons it took us so long is because early on we didn't use these principles, and it was when we start to put these principles in place where it gave us the clarity and the focus of where should we spend our time, how do we spend our time, and how do we get closer to that repeatability. Okay, great. Another question. What are the 3 things you hope people take away from this panel? Good question. Number one, I'm going to give you 4. Number one, building a metrics-driven business wins, period. It's really important that you have intuition to drive what you think you're going to do, but back it up with data and metrics. Number 2, number 1, metrics driven win. Number 2, having, whether or not you believe in these frameworks, I actually don't care. If you don't think this is the right way for you to go, that's okay with me. But believe me, having a framework or a series of frameworks to help you get there is going to make your journey much, much more efficient. You're going to waste less time. You're going to waste less money. It's still going to be really, really hard. But if this doesn't work for you, use this as an opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to go find a framework that does, or a series of frameworks that do work for me. And number 3, this is really, really hard. And make no mistake about it. If you're building a business and you think like, oh, this is going to be easy and we're going to exit in 3 to 5 years, or, oh, okay, I know this is going to be hard, but we're going to exit in 3 to 5 years or whatever. Like, if you're going about this process, you should assume that you have just your hands and that you need to go to your backyard and you need to go dig a ditch that's 100 feet wide by 100 feet long and 100 feet deep through limestone with just your fingertips. And what I'm trying to do with this process is to say, here's a shovel or here's a backhoe to help it go a little bit faster. You don't need to do it just with your fingertips. So those are answering your questions. Those are the 3 things. I guess the 4th is go buy my book. But it's okay if you don't, but go buy my book. Okay. Next question. What steps do entrepreneurs often skip? What are common assumptions we make? I would classify it this way. There's lots of sub things to what I'm about to say, but the number one thing that I see is that people jump to scaling and skip that they have to prove repeatability first. So you might say, I might get 3 sales, 5 customers, 7 customers, 20 customers, and say, great, I'm ready to scale. But yet you don't understand how you can do that in a repeatable fashion. And so when you do that, you're literally skipping a step. And so when you skip that step, you're now asking a bunch of people that aren't as committed to the business, that don't have as much time in the business, to go and figure out how to do the things that you have figured out, and some of which is driven by intuition. So understanding that the journey, like, I would argue, stop thinking about your business as Series Seed, Series A, Series B, Series C, etc. But think of it as ideation, MVP, testing, repeatability, scaling, growth, right? So, and I'll explain that. Repeatability means that I have figured out if I do one thing will happen. If I do that same thing 5 times, it will happen 5 times and back. I'll get 5 things back. That may break at some point in the scale, but I understand what that repeatability is. Don't go to scaling before you understand that. You'll waste a whole bunch of time and money. And then what I mean by growth is, so think about scaling is not actually going from 10 million to 100 million, or 1 million to 10 million, or a billion, or whatever. Scaling is I have repeatability, and now I know how to make that repeatability happen at scale. That step by itself takes a lot of work and is an area where a lot of companies mess up. Once you have that, that's when you start to actually grow. Okay. Let's see, I think a good question. Okay, so there's Caroline threw a good thing in there, which is like address misconceptions around KPIs, or how to come up with KPIs. What I'll tell you is I've been doing this for a really, really long time. I work with, literally dozens of companies every single year. It is very, very hard to figure out the right KPIs for your business. So a couple of things. One, sometimes they change really frequently. Like they could change week to week, sometimes even day to day. Other KPIs may stick around for weeks or months even as you're learning. The notion that you want to put in your head, I'm going to go back to something I said probably 10 times when we were on the KPI slide, is when you look at what you're trying to achieve, what does this KPI unlock for me? And another thing that I actually skipped over saying is all of your KPIs, all of the things you're doing, how do they tie to your revenue formula? It may be 7 or 8 levels deep, but how do they actually tie to your revenue formula? And if they don't, take a pause and ask yourself why. Maybe you're not working on the right thing, or maybe there's something you're working on that you just forgot to include in your revenue formula. And also always think about whether or not they are leading or lagging. And I know this is another way to say, what does it unlock for you? But one of the most common mistakes that I see with KPIs is that people go to lagging KPIs, not leading KPIs. Revenue, number of customers. Those are things that don't tell you what to do next. They told you what has already happened. So how do you figure out a KPI that tells you what to do next? Okay. Another question. We got about 4 minutes left. Any changes you'd make to this for more consulting, contracting-based businesses for CPC? Yeah, so it's a great question. So the question it said differently is, it makes sense on how it applies to a CPC business. Does it make sense when you're talking about other types of businesses? I have quite literally applied this to consulting businesses that do, tens of millions of dollars, apparel businesses, SaaS businesses, B2C companies. I've pressure tested it. I have yet to find a business where you can't, there are little nuances that might be different, right? Those are hard to answer sort of broadly without asking you a bunch of questions, but those are more specific to your business versus more broadly consulting business versus B2B SaaS versus apparel. So yes, there are nuances that will change, but generally speaking, the framework will work regardless of the type of business it is. Cool. Any other questions? We got about 3 minutes left. And I hope this was really good for everybody. I really do hope that people are walking away with at least one thing. And I know I said 4, but at least one thing, which is like, I have to figure out, how do I create a disciplined way to figure out whether or not I'm right or wrong? Great. Well, there's no more questions. With that, I thank you all for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I hope you all have an awesome startup week. We live in such a killer place. Let's keep making Austin awesome. Have an awesome day, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
Amos.
Yeah.
Bye. On what it's like to create community amongst your customers and for your brand at an early stage. Some of these companies were pre-product when they were kind of going over this concept, and how to then in turn use that community of customers to leverage, changes to your product roadmap or just more awareness around your brand and what you're building. So we're going to bring up Alex Friedman again, CEO and founder of Talk Howdy, and Claire Siegel, CEO and founder of Flourish, and her co-founder, John Ganthier. And then finally, our moderator and panelist, Nick Gillicuddy from Carta. Hi, James.
Hey everyone, hope everyone's doing well down in Austin. Love the city. It's been a couple of years, but I always look forward to getting down there. So kind of just by way of agenda today, we'll quickly kind of run around the group here, introduce ourselves, give a little bit of background on what we've done and why we are where we are today. But really kind of the goal of today's session to kind of piggyback a little bit on what Carolyn said is we want to make sure that we're discussing how to use and leverage community and therefore customers as well as you think about going from 0 to 1 and then 1 to 10, et cetera. And specifically, kind of what is the importance of specific communities that help you scope your problem? What's the importance of building community pre-product in order to know how to gain customers and how to use them for early stage feedback to basically enable faster iteration cycles and feedback cycles. Then also the role that community can play in building, maintaining, and evangelizing your product and brand over time. We'll also talk about a little bit towards the end about, how to say no to community and how to think about being user informed, not user driven. So with that, to my panelists, did I miss anything, or does that sound like a good agenda? Perfect.
Sounds awesome.
So I'll just quickly introduce myself first and then, pass it off. So James from McGillicuddy, work here at Carta. I've been here for about 3 years, excuse me. This is my third startup, although Carta's, fairly large now. But before that, I was a COO of a company called SourceGraph, which is a code search engine. It was 2 founders and a dog when I showed up. It's about, I think, a couple hundred folks now, and is doing, just fantastically well. Before that, I worked at a business called Relate IQ, which Salesforce bought back in 2015. I was the first business hire outside the founding team, and started my career as a growth equity investor at a firm called Summit Partners. So I've kind of been on both sides of the table of investing and building, and really get a lot of energy every day from getting up and helping use my community to further the mission of the companies I've worked at, and specifically right now, Carta. So Alex, you want to go for it?
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. Hi, James. Hi, Claire. Hi, John. Hi, Hi, I'm Alex Friedman. I'm the founder of Howdy. We are a vertical search engine for online communities and events. I also recently launched Founder Gigs, which is a talent marketplace for founders to find part-time and hourly work with other startups. And previously, I was the program manager for both Techstars Austin and Techstars Impact, where I got to work with a bunch of different founders and also build community that way.
Awesome. Claire?
Yeah, I'll go next. So I'm Claire, CEO and founder of Flourish. We help women get healthy for good through the full spectrum of behavioral health, and we do so by offering a subscription membership that offers our members unlimited access to credentialed experts, community support, and also an evidence-based education.
Great. And last but not least, John.
Yep, that leaves me. I am Jonathan Ganthier. I am Claire's co-founder at We Flourish, acting mostly as a business lead, thinking a lot about all of the business things. I started working with Claire probably 2 years ago through taking a class during my MBA. I've really seen the power of community through there, and then also worked with Techstars as well and saw what we can do when we come together as well there. So excited to talk more about it with y'all.
Awesome. So I think, probably some folks in the audience might be thinking like, kind of like, how do you define community? Like, what is community? So maybe that's just a good place to start. We'll kind of leave out the, Webster's dictionary community definition. But Alex, like, maybe just like, how do you define community? How do you think about community to start? And then, it would be awesome to hear how you've kind of evolved your community over time and thought about leveraging them.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make when they try to define community is they look at it from a very numbers driven thing, like how many people are in the community, how things like that. When really it's about you can have a very powerful and strong community when there's 10 to 15 people. So it's really about are the people coming together? Do they share the same vision? Do they share the same values? And then what is the ultimate goal of the people within the community? Is it to learn? Is it to support each other? Is it to connect? Is it to get healthy for good? What is the ultimate goal and how can that drive it? So community can mean different things to different people. I think really the important thing is finding the community that feels right for you and aligns with your values more so than anything. I'm not sure if that's exactly the question that you're looking for. That's kind of how I look at community from a very, very high level.
Yeah, totally. Fantastic. And then there's a couple of follow-ons there, but we'll share from Claire and John maybe, and then we can kind of jump into the next level down.
Yeah, I mean, I think Alex really summed it up quite well. I think something important as you're thinking about community as it relates to your business is understanding how, first and foremost, your customer sees community and what, to kind of echo Alex, what she said, what they're looking to get out of being involved in a community, if they're even aware of the fact that they're looking for a community, or if they're even aware of the potential benefits of being part of a community. And then using that information, developing a better understanding of how your community can ultimately serve your business. I think these two questions are especially important right now, where community is such a buzzword, and we see communities kind of being attached onto businesses as a feature where there's not really a clear ROI for the customer or the business itself. And so I think it's really important to think through just foundationally, again, where does community fit in the eyes of your customer, and then in the purpose of the business that you're building.
I think sorry, John.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the interesting thing about defining community is I don't know if it can totally be defined. Just echoing off of what Claire was saying, I think it means something different to everyone. And a community can mean a small group of people. It can mean a business. It can mean what nationality you are. It can mean so many different things. So I think it's hard to put a real definition to it.
Right. And that goes along with almost exactly what I was thinking, right? You, James, mentioned that we're going to leave out the textbook definition of community. I mean, it is just a group of people, but where I think the magic of community lies is where there's that really deep connection, right? And there's some sort of really common bond, or it doesn't even have to be a goal necessarily, but something that is really in common. I think the engagement in a community, for me, is what really defines a true community rather than just a group of individuals, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And then how have you guys thought, like when you've gone from, 0 to 1, and Alex, you brought up the great point that, community doesn't have to be, 50, 100, 200. It could be 15 people. It could be a million people. Communities are all different shapes and sizes. How have you all thought about kind of taking that one little kind of like trace of community, fervent supporters, and then starting to build like a movement or product or really a business around that? And tactile examples would be great. I can actually start with a quick example. So my previous company, a company called SourceGraph, it's a code search engine. And as folks know, I'm sure there's some developers in the audience. Raise your hand. Okay, I can't see you, but hopefully some hands raised. There's all different languages that developers can write in. Go, Java, JavaScript, TypeScript, et cetera, et cetera. And what we did to kind of start is we leveraged the open source Go community to provide code intelligence at the time. So a way to really understand how code works. And because the technology required analysis of every single language in order for it to work in that given language, we couldn't start off servicing the TypeScript community. We couldn't start off servicing the JavaScript community or the Java community. So we started with the Go community, and we got a bunch of fervent supporters, a bunch of folks in the Go community called Gophers. That's what they call themselves, that were just so incredibly passionate about what SourceGraph had built. And then from there, we were able to add on other languages and this kind of organic kind of community building around a fervent belief in a really, really useful, game-changing product at the time, still is obviously, was really a way to kind of help us snowball community. And then we were able to basically use those learnings to make that kind of Go analyzer even better, to get more of those folks, and then snowball that into kind of other languages. So that's just an example of how we kind of leveraged community back then to do that. And obviously, at Carta, we've done it by starting with the venture community, which turns out to be pretty big business. But yeah, Alex, Claire, John, any kind of tactical examples like that for the audience?
Yeah, I can actually use an example that happened very, very recently. I've worked with thousands of founders now, just from my experience with Techstars and doing things after. And one thing that consistently came up was people asking me for part-time roles or hourly roles with other startups, and I had no idea where to find it. So I've been getting more active on Twitter, and I ended up tweeting it out, just asking if anyone had any places that I could send my friends to. And people started responding to it being like, oh, it's a great idea. So, but didn't have any place to actually go. So I ended up building it in no code and launching it. That's what Founder Gigs is. And ended up getting, we're at 975 signups in about 2.5 weeks. So that literally all just happened through the power of community and through the power of listening to your community, which I think is like one of the biggest things about it, and leveraging really like who are the people around you and how can you start solving problems for those people. And then the other example was my first company, which was a nail polish product. Is I built up a following on Instagram, where it's all people that were obsessed with nail polish. And so I brought them along for the ride, and I would ask them like, do you like this color more? And this was like pre-production. I literally had a prototype. And I would ask them, like, what color do you like more? Vote on it. Or I would ask them like, do you like it with glitter? Do you like it without glitter? Like, you bring people along for the ride. And then the first day I launched it, we sold over 1,000 units. And like, that's what happens when you really like involve people in the process and make them feel like they're not just a customer, but they're actually like a part of this building. And like, they mean a lot to you. And it makes it actually way more fun too, to build a business.
That's great. Claire, John, any kind of thoughts to that extent?
Yeah, I mean, I would say our experience was somewhat similar to Alex's in terms of building on social media first. I would say a lot of the growth, I guess, we've had with Flourish and growing our subscription membership has been kind of off the back of my personal brand. But I think the more that I have learned about community and social media and personal brands, the more I realize that having a personal brand and having a large Instagram or Twitter or whatever presence does not a community make. I think, Alex, your example of kind of building in public with your nail polish company is a beautiful example of how you can build community around social media. But for those of you in the audience who are thinking about how you can leverage your own self as a founder, CEO, and again, personal brand, it's not the same thing as community, right? Because that is almost like a one-to-one connection of one follower to one individual. That's what I had at first. And then as we began to run essentially a group-oriented coaching program, that's when I started to learn about the power of community in our business. And learning that for us, at least and we learned this through experimentation and testing different messages, and also just talking, of course, to our customers. For us, community is not an acquisition tool, right? Like, our customers aren't actually looking for community, or at least the vast majority of them, because they don't know that they need to, because especially with the women that we work with, the work that they've done on nutrition and health and their relationship with their body and things like that, they've always done it alone. And they're not even in a sort of stage of awareness where they recognize kind of the pitfalls of that. But what we do realize is that once our members are in the community, it is a massive driver of retention. And that experience of connection is, again, a benefit that they're not even aware that they're looking for. And so we craft our marketing message to reflect that, where we're not, waving the community flag necessarily to our members, but we're doing everything we can once they're in the platform to support that engagement with the community and that feeling of connectedness.
And James, you talked about going from 0 to 1. So I watched Claire sort of build this thing. She was building an audience beforehand. And I think about how, for you, Claire, it seemed like to me from, again, the outside looking in, that you started building sort of just by sharing very authentically something that you cared about, and noticed that a lot of people started following you and engaging with you based on that content and based on the stuff that you were sharing. And it seems almost like there was this recognition that, like, there's this community here, right? But they don't know each other necessarily yet, but there's the opportunity based on all of these people who are engaging in such a positive way to build a community for them, right? And so maybe it started with personal brand and just sharing in general, right? But that kind of gave us the idea of, like, here's an opportunity to connect a lot of people who share something in common and who could build like an actual authentic connection with each other. So
Totally.
I was just going to say, I kind of wanted to touch on something Claire said, which I think is actually very, very important. A lot of people don't realize that they're looking for community. So if you ask someone, I get this whole trend right now, it's a buzzword, as Claire also mentioned, where it's everyone's join our community. People aren't really, that's not how you get engaged members to your community. People are looking for conversations. They're looking for connections. They're looking for support. They're looking for so really what your job is as a founder is find out what your customers are actually looking for, and then form that into a community, not join our community. Because if you're just saying join our community, you're going to have a bunch of people in a Slack group that aren't talking to each other. That's what's going to happen. But if you say, hey, we want to enable you to have the right conversations or to get the right support, way different, and a way different mentality.
Totally. I will also add, depending on your business model and your plan for monetization, join our community is not necessarily a great message, because so many communities are free, right? Mm-hmm. So again, to the extent that it's not what the customer is looking for, and again, they have so many free options. If you're thinking about something like us, a paid subscription membership, why would someone join your community when I could go join a Facebook group or a free Slack channel or just exist on Twitter? There has to be something else there.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you touched on most people don't know that they're looking for community. I think in general some of the best products and services out there, people don't know they were looking for it, and they kind of stumbled into it. And they might show up for the community, but then they might stay kind of for the service, which I think is pretty powerful. There are also a number of examples throughout the years around people, might not actually, stay for the service, but they'll contribute to the community. So there was this famous court case back in the 80s, I think, where there was the Microsoft help boards, and there would be a number of people that would just go on and basically be working like 30 or 40 hours a week, just answering questions for the community. And, they would do that without pay. And if you look at the open source community as it pertains to code, like there are people maintaining giant open source projects that aren't making a dime. And they do it for kind of community. So I think kind of the underlying kind of, part of this is that, people crave human connection, and that the community can bring a different sense of utility than just the product that you're selling and offering. And if you build an all-round community product business ethos around providing utility for the person that chooses to engage for one of those aforementioned things, that can help kind of drive your brand. And then you'll pull people along that want to buy something from you, or people that just want to support you. And that's super, super important as you think about the world of kind of product-led evangelism, that is so persistent, and I think will continue to grow with the busyness of kind of ad spend today. So by the way, I don't know if people can ask questions. I forgot during the login the other day if they can, but if people can ask questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Caroline, sorry if I messed that up. Also, one other interesting thing is maybe talking about, considering it's startup week, so people probably starting companies, maybe like some of the early stage kind of community learnings of what not to do. I think that's actually really important, really, really important kind of as people think about kind of their kind of business, whether it's from community or customers or both. So any ideas there that folks would love to share on mistakes they've learned or lessons they've learned from mistakes they've made with engaging with community in the right or wrong way?
Alex, I feel like you have definitely a few, and I'm curious what you think of this. I think it is really helpful to create some sort of like hierarchy in a community. And by that, I really just mean having like a designated leader or driver of community and engagement. In Flourish, that comes in the form of our group coaching calls, where we have kind of one person in charge who guides conversation and calls on people and can lead a discussion and also kind of like moderate, right? Cutting someone off if they're hogging the mic or what have you, and replicating that same experience in our member platform. It has historically not worked really well when it's kind of just left up to whoever is the loudest in the room to be that community leader, because either you get kind of the wrong person leading the community and guiding the conversation, or it's just total cricket. So I know that's something that we've found. Alex, I don't know. I know you've run many different experiments with how to get community up and running. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think the hierarchy is really important. I would actually rather I'd rather like switch that word to empowering, and like empowering certain members to have more responsibility or to have better buy-in with your community is really important. Like what will happen, and there's this whole like statistic when it comes to community that it's 99-1. So 90% of your community is going to be like lurkers, or like pretty much very, very passive. 9% are going to be like, like they're engaging, liking things. And then 1% are really, really going to drive everything that you do. You want to lean into that 1%, and you want to empower that 1% to continue doing that. So that means like maybe don't have a ton of rules, like have some guidelines, but it doesn't mean that you need to like be super strict and control everything. But then also don't let it be a free for all. Trust me, don't do that one. I think that's really important. I'm like trying to think what else are like really valuable learning lessons. Have a plan, like even if it's just a framework of a plan. I know with community being like such a buzzword and so hot right now, it's really easy to say like, okay, I'm going to launch a community, and then you drop everyone into a Slack or Discord. But really when that happens is you just have an empty Slack or Discord. I have an empty Slack. It doesn't like in it, and that's what happens. So unless you're like empowering people to really take charge and continue the conversations and to host things, like it'll end up being crickets, and then it's kind of just a waste of everyone's time. But like if you put together a plan and really think of it as a job, because a lot of these communities are now, I mean, that's pretty much the basis of the Talk Howdy business model is a lot of these communities are now becoming small businesses, and they're run like small businesses, which means that there's people in charge, there's people coming in to do events, there's like parameters around it. And what you need to do is when you're building that out is think about what you want the community to look like, think about what kind of people you want it to attract, and then start building out from there.
That's great. And Claire, I hope the bad moderator thing wasn't pointed at me. Not that I thought it was. I'm just
Certainly
kidding.
not. Doing a great job.
No. I'm kidding. Gonna make it lively. That's awesome. So, actually, Alex, to that like point, I think you said something like really, really pertinent. It's like, you know, we're all in kind of empty Slacks and Discords. And you know, you said, you know, you like you had to have someone kind of, you know, in there kind of like curating it. Any advice for folks out there that are trying to build community kind of in this, you know, pandemic world, that, you know, knock on wood, we're coming out of it, but you know, how is building community been difficult? How, you know, in the pandemic, what are some of the tactics that you all have used? What hasn't worked? That would be awesome to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, I've actually building community during the pandemic world has been great because I think people have realized that the lack of community really gets to them. But like I said, it all goes back to having a plan. Like decide what you want your community to look like. Does everyone meet synchronously? Does everyone talk asynchronously? Do y'all have weekly meetups? Do you have hosted events? Is there just an open room where people can hop in? There's so many different types of communities that you can do here. So you can really tailor it. So that's one way, is like have a plan. The second thing is have like an intention, like a group intention. So like, what do you want everyone to get out of it? If you're just doing it because you're like, oh, like this might be cool and maybe I'll check in on it every once in a while, it's going to fail. Like as simple as that. Like it probably will fail. But if you say, okay, I want everyone to connect over this topic specifically, or I want them to feel supported, or I want them to have better conversations, you can engage people and you can build a framework around that. So like, for instance, if I wanted to continue on with my community of founders, I would invite in other founders like Claire and John and say, hey, they're going to do a talk on this to my group of founders, because it's continuing the conversations that I want people to be having within my community.
John or Claire, anything to add to that?
No, I think that was beautifully put. Like I mentioned, I mean, the whole thing for me about community is driving that engagement. And to Alex's point, it's about getting creative and making sure that you're grabbing the reins and making sure that your community is engaged. You're providing the content that you want them to engage with. And for me, if I think about going from 0 to 1, I'm trying to identify the people who are like most bought into whatever this community is centered around, right? Like I want to find those evangelists, as you mentioned, the people who are going to drive conversation potentially in my absence and, you know, help other people stay engaged as well.
Awesome. So it looks like we do have a question from the audience, from Haley. Question: I actually wanted to ask if, as a founder, having a personal brand is a necessary condition to building a brand and therefore community for my startup. Thanks, Haley. I am not a founder. I don't have a huge brand, so I will let someone else speak to this.
I can jump in. Oh, John, go ahead. You want to? Okay. I'm guessing based on the way that this question is being asked and also the fact that it is being asked, that perhaps this is not something that this person in particular is drawn to, in which case I would say, I don't think there's any necessary conditions for being a founder or having a business or starting up a startup. Like, I don't really believe in these absolutes. And I would also say that if growing your personal brand, or I don't know, I don't even love that terminology, but whatever, growing your personal brand is not something that you're sort of drawn to or inclined to do, then no. It does take time. It takes intention and planning and thoughtfulness. And I think it just takes a certain desire to be that figurehead. And by the same token, I think it can be a huge asset to your business, right? So if it is something that you're drawn to, or at least you're open to being drawn to and exploring, then I would say it can be a huge differentiator and again, a huge asset to whatever it is that you're building or want to build.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. I don't think that it's certainly a necessary condition. I think where it's been helpful probably is when we're going out potentially to like raise money, right? Like people know who you are, you've met with them, you've got a connection with them, they like what you're doing, they like who you are. That's one thing, but is it absolutely necessary? Definitely not. I think the one thing in startup land that cures everything is growth, right? So if you have a good idea, you're executing on it, you can have no personal brand and be somewhat of an unknown quantity. And if your business speaks for itself, then that's the end of that. And in my experience and personal opinion. So
it's funny because Claire and I were actually literally just texting about this 2 days ago about personal brands. I'll say the same thing my dad always says about money is it doesn't guarantee happiness, but it makes things a lot easier.
Yeah.
So building out a personal brand and having a personal brand, it does make things easier because you can leverage that brand to do your marketing. So like founder gigs, we have 900-ish signups, right? That was all just from my personal brand on Twitter. And so doing that, you have to supplement it with something else. So if you don't want to build out your personal brand, learn how to do a different type of marketing channel a lot better. Like I'm not very good at other marketing channels, but I'm good at talking to people. So I'm going to like lean into that. And that's really, it's just like a give and take of any type of marketing.
Yeah. And I would say one sort of thing to perhaps caution against is just thinking about, okay, if this business is reliant on my personal brand, and if I am, going to try and grow and scale this thing and especially go out to potentially raise funds, like how do I tell that story? How do I make it clear that my personal brand only adds to the business and that it doesn't become a bottleneck for the business or like a rate limiting factor? I think that's something that we've historically more, I would say like probably 2 years ago when we were kind of operating under a different business model, that was sort of like a red flag to potential investors or stakeholders or even mentors. And we've learned how to kind of scale me and also develop a Flourish brand alongside of it such that we're kind of both growing in a very complementary way.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And the other thing too is I've been, fortunate to work with a number of tremendous, founders, and it really all kind of depends. I've worked with founders. I've worked for founders that have zero online brand, zero presence, but what they're known for is just building incredible product and solving really hard problems. And within their community, they're known as kind of the person. I think it's pretty challenging today to kind of look at Twitter and look at Instagram and kind of look at these giant brands around people that have been started that just happen to have a business as well. And it could be a chicken and egg problem. They might have a giant brand now because of the success that they've had, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they had that first. And in general, kind of doing things to accelerate your business is just generally the best thing, obviously. So if that means building your personal brand, then go do that. But if it means instead of spending 5 hours a week writing tweet storms or writing blog posts, and that's recruiting the next great product person, the next great engineer, the next great recruiter, then spend time doing that. And there are different kind of inflection points of your business as you scale and grow it, where you're going to go from the proverbial taking the trash out to kind of being high level and just recruiting and just kind of being direction and vision. And that's, I think, oftentimes really where you'll see brand really kind of come in. So let's see, any other questions on here? Nope, not yet. Please, folks, ask questions. Love them. But just in case, we have some more teed up. So how would you, like, if you look at each of your individual companies, like, how would you think about kind of like the early, the kind of earliest members of your community, and then how do they kind of help you go from 0 to 1? We heard obviously, Alex, about kind of the nail polish community that from the community that you had built, but like what are some of the other ways that have helped you go from 0 to 1? And also, like, what are some of the kind of guiding principles around not listening to your community, because actually it might be better for them down the road if you don't kind of adopt that new product or kind of take and internalize that feedback. Anyone want to jump in? Great.
I can jump in here. I'll dive into the kind of not listening to your community piece. I mean, your customers are such a gold mine of information. And I think that's something that we got out of the Techstars experience. We did Techstars with, I don't know if we said this, we did Techstars with Alex earlier this year, which is how we know each other. But it's so easy as a founder to get caught up in every single minute detail of the business. And there's always so many things that can be done. And you always feel like, you know, you've got this great gut instinct and intuition about how to build the business. And that can get you really far. But I think to really grow in a intelligent and intentional way, you have to do so with your customers in mind. Now, that doesn't mean that if your customer tells you that they want accountability buddies, that's the thing that you go out and build. So we always take, you know, especially when it comes to like specific feature requests, which we don't necessarily ask for, but often get, taking that kind of with a grain of salt and thinking through, one, is this necessary? Does this really serve kind of what we know to be true about our customers in terms of their desired levels of engagement, what we've seen in the past? And also, is there a low res way of testing this idea out, especially before we put it into like our product development cycle? Because you can spend a lot of time and financial resources building, you know, based on the whims of your customers, and they may not, you know, be right there. So I think it is so helpful to gather as much quantitative and qualitative data as you can from your community members, but then you have to be the one to kind of zoom out, synthesize it, test it, and then really put it into practice, which takes time, but it's a worthwhile investment.
Yeah. So I've been fortunate where I've kind of worked on launching, you know, kind of building early product and launching three different products now. Actually, four. One failed in college. But you know, one of the things I think is super important is kind of being you know really empathetic to your customers and your community, hearing what their problems are, but not actually building what they say that they kind of want. It's your job as a kind of builder, creator, founder to figure out what the pain is and then build the solution for the market. And that's kind of a nuanced point between being user informed and user driven. Henry Ford always says, if I ask people what they would have wanted, would have wanted a faster horse. And oftentimes people will basically articulate the problem that they have with solutions that they would want. And while that's important to kind of hear and listen to them, you should bring that back to your laboratory, your idea factory, and then, you know, kind of dissect that problem. So in my first company, Relate IQ, we knew that, you know, a huge problem was, you know, all of basically it was a next gen CRM business. And instead of, you know, logging information into Salesforce, we built a completely vertically integrated CRM where we would actually automatically capture all of your emails, your contacts, your calendar invites, and then we'd actually show you who else on your team was in an active conversation. And you know, one of the big parts there is that a lot of the customers early on were saying, you know, I'd love it if I could like kind of augment or like delete this email out of the system. I'd love to like change some of the metadata. And we really stuck to our guns on it because one of the core product principles was automatic. And if we started letting users kind of change the fidelity of kind of our product principles, it's very much a slippery slope. So for a while we had to kind of grin and bear as, you know, some of the outliers were, you know, upset about the fact that, you know, they couldn't remove information from the system. But we really stuck by our guns on that. So it ends up actually really helping folks. Oftentimes they just don't realize it. It's almost like eating your vegetables, which I could probably eat a few more vegetables in COVID. But I think that's like super, super important for folks is, you know, it's your vision, it's your company. be empathetic to the market, be user informed, but not kind of user driven on the really foundational things, especially for kind of the window dressings and the frills, like totally like engage with them, put those things in the product in your service. But for the big kind of platform product principles, company game changing products and services, you really need to stick by your vision. All right, looks like we have, anyone have anything else to add? If not, we have another question. Great. So anonymous question. In regards to personal brands, have any of you ever experienced hiccups in refining your personal brand? How do you navigate being young and passionate without coming off as brash, arrogant, etc.? Great question, considering that a lot of the Twitter sphere and whatever else out there is kind of, people get a rise out of a brash, arrogant statement, attacking people. I don't have a big personal brand, so I'll let someone else take it away first. John, any thoughts on this, or what you've seen?
Yeah, I'm fortunate to be a beneficiary of Claire's personal brand. I do think that you have a point, though. It's an interesting state that we're in, right? Because a lot of the algorithms reward outlandish behavior and like being brash and like making these big statements. Is that what you want to be known for? Is a different question than will it help you gain a following, right? And so I guess you have to think about which one's more important to you and sort of lay out the map of where you're trying to go and where you're trying to get to. Tech is full of notoriously brash and arrogant people. And again, it's not always a disqualifier. It's not always good either, but I'll let Claire and Alex probably speak more to it because they have more experience building it, refining it, and working on it, whereas I am more behind the scenes and sort of heads down in Excel most of the time.
Alex, you go first.
Okay. Great question. First of all, I think that there are certain things you can say that might come off a little brash without being offensive. Like, I'll say definitive statements all the time on Twitter, which literally can just be like, being a founder is lonely. And people are like, yeah, that's true. I think the way you can navigate it without coming off as like arrogant is by being like vulnerable. Like, I talk all the time about mental health. I talk about my own mental health struggles. I talk about my failures. I also talk about my wins. I really talk about every aspect of being a founder, not just the really, really good parts of it. Because a lot of the time, a lot of people only talk about the really, really good parts of things. That's like the problem with social media, right? Like, everyone knows that. So I think just being like pretty authentic in what you're doing, who you actually are beneath the surface, is the best way to do that without people being like, oh, they're just bragging all the time on social media.
I could not agree more with that, in terms of just being authentic and not pretending like everything is perfect and rosy all the time, especially if you are building a community of founders around you. A couple things that I've learned, and I would say my personal brand is more so directed to like our direct consumer. We're a D2C business. So, and I've personally evolved quite a bit since I started blogging back in like 2011. And I've had to be really thoughtful about how my personal and professional views have evolved and how I share that without looking wishy-washy or like I don't know what I'm talking about, right? And so I think I have a few things that I keep in mind a lot when I'm thinking about what to share, whether it's on Twitter or more so where I've built my personal brand on Instagram. I think one thing is sharing from your scars and not your wounds. Right? So if you're actively going through something, that's probably not the thing that you want to like live tweet, right? But once you've had time to kind of digest it and learn from it, and again, it's kind of scarred over, if you will, that's a beautiful time to share and to do so from a really thoughtful and to Alex's point, vulnerable and authentic place. When that vulnerability makes sense, like Brené Brown talks a lot about the fine line between vulnerability and oversharing, and I won't attempt to teach her work here, but that's something to be aware of. Remembering that you are always representing your business, like always representing your business is so incredibly important. And that happens when you're driving in your car and you're having road rage, or you're speaking with a waiter, or you're out buying sunglasses or whatever, right? You are always representing your business. I think that's true for every founder, but especially true if you are someone with a personal brand, just remembering that you are a figurehead and representing what you're building. And then the last thing, and this might be perhaps the most freeing, is that you just can't control how people feel about you. You like really cannot control how people feel about you. You cannot control what they think about you. So do your best and know that not everyone is going to like you, and that's okay. That's not your job.
Yeah, totally. Well, thanks for that, team. So, nice. Some more questions rolling in from Joseph Wade. If you were building a community and starting from zero, what would your first 30 days look like? That's a loaded question. It's a fantastic question, and I think it's really dependent on the type of business that you're building. I'd say that first and foremost, if you want to think of this early community in this case as kind of your first cohort of customers, you want to basically engage with them and get feedback. Oh, that's a bad angle. I'd go out there and engage with them and empathetically listen to them. Listen to what their problems are. Listen to what some of their solutions might be, not because you should just go build that, but because there's some signal within there. And I do this in a fairly scientific way. I would sit down, come up with a list of the questions that you want. I would be very, very focused on customer segmentation and community segmentation. That's something that I think people don't talk enough about, especially in early stage companies. Once you kind of grow up, you hire this function called product marketing. And product marketing, I believe, is one of the most overlooked functions of a company early on. Oftentimes it's taken on by the founder who has the vision, but even the most amazing founders can really benefit early on from a product marketer, and especially if you're kind of in the B2B world, let's say, and that's been my experience. Because if you have your sales folks and your go-to-market folks out there, they're saying, hey, this customer wants this, to the product folks, and then the product folks are like, typical sales folks, and I've been one of these people, telling us what to build. You have a product marketer there that's really kind of the voice of the customer and the voice of your community, and understanding them, segmenting them, I think is super, super important. So a little bit of a tangent there at the end, but I'd say be very, very scientific early on, to at least get the signal of where to start within your vision. And I'll pass it off to the panel, or my panelists here, to kind of dive in a little bit more.
First 30 days, what would I do? I would build out a plan. I would literally write out a schedule of the 30 days. I would look at it from a week by week basis. I would try to organize it. Okay, so like the first week, what are you going to do? Are you going to do reach out? Are you going to decide who you want the community to be for? You want to do things that are very like base level logistics. So like, what platform do you want to use? Are you going to monetize it? Who's it for? How to reach out to people, etc. So that's like what I would do the first week. Second week, I would get into like, what's the reach out plan? How are you going to like acquire people for your communities? Or for your community, I should say. And then after that, I would look at scheduling out things and like, what's the structure going to be like? So are you going to have once weekly meetings? Are you going to do events? Are you going to have small groups? Like, what does that look like if you're creating a community from scratch? Yeah, I think that's what the first, and just to reiterate, the question was, if you were building a community and starting from zero, what would your first 30 days look like? So I think that's what my first 30 days would look like.
Yeah, to kind of jump off of what Alex said, I think all of that and as many customer conversations as you could have. And with those different touch points that Alex mentioned, exploring and experimenting with different things to figure out what engagement looks like in your community. Do most people want to be on a group call, or do they want it to be like webinar style where you're just presenting? Do they want it to happen in a chat thread, right? Different people engage and connect and take in information in different ways. And also understanding what that kind of time commitment looks like. That's something that we've had to really think about with our product, especially because it's, again, direct to consumer. This is our jobs. Certainly for me as a founder, I think about it 24/7, but our customer isn't. And so when we're thinking about how much time that we're asking for them to invest in, being in this community, we have to have realistic expectations and think about making it as easy and enriching and enjoyable as possible for them to do so. So it doesn't just become like another thing on the box for them to check off. And I think yes, you can experiment your way to finding those answers, and you should. And also you'll probably learn a lot just from having those types of conversations with your customers.
I think that's right. And I have maybe a slightly different perspective. I think I'm generally maybe a bit less, I should say maybe a bit more freeform clear than the way that you think. But I think assuming that there's a plan of like an idea of what you want your community to center around, I think my first 30 days, again, not that this is right or wrong, this is just how I think, first thing would be a lot of outreach. And again, really trying to identify true believers, evangelists, like the people who you have conversations with who seem to be really interested, really engaged with what you're talking about. I would try to have deeper conversations with them, and then maybe even help them sort of shape what we do into, like you said, Claire, what does it look like? How are we going to host this community? How often are we going to meet? What does the time commitment look like? That way, we've already gotten this core group of believers. Now you're helping them feel a bit of ownership over this community. It's going to give them, I think, a lot of motivation and make it a lot easier to recruit other people into the community. And then basically after a couple, weeks, start thinking through, now that we've gone through this, we've got some people here, how do we make it even better? Just start optimizing bit by bit and sort of rinse and repeat.
Yeah, I think there's a great point about Claire, about being really intentional with people's time. That's, I think, one way to build, you should be respectful to whomever, but, really being respectful of people's time up front, I think is so important in the early days, especially when, your website's going to crash, or you're going to deliver the wrong, service. You need folks that just from day one think you're respectful with their time and their perspective. Great. We have some more questions coming in from Steven DeGrazia. Can you talk about building your early community / customer base, and if they want to become early investors of the company, and how to approach that? Good question there, Stephen. I think it all kind of depends on kind of where the business is. If the folks have the means to invest, and you can get them incentivized by more than just impacting their life with your product, or their company's life with their product, then by all means. Every company that I've worked at, we've given folks that are early customers the ability to invest, and that might be from the founder having a personal relationship with an early customer as part of their community to start, from a pre-existing company, or just a personal relationship. So sure, I think it's fine to let folks invest and have skin in the game. I think that you'll see more and more kind of like micro equity grants that are starting to be given out. There's a cool company called Cabal that does this, CABAL, and they basically allow your customers in your community to perform actions, and then they get little micro equity grants, versus the traditional, John's an advisor, I'm going to give him 20 basis points of the company. Well, what if you had, that same 20 basis points if you gave it out to 5 or 6 other people? But yeah, I think it's completely fine. And the more folks that can be on board helping your success, the more likely you are to be successful. Anyone else?
Yeah. So for our repivoted a few months ago, we used to run these small group communities, and we had I think like 3 of our beta users asked if they could invest, which was like an amazing feeling. It was awesome. We actually weren't raising though. But one way that we were able to move that relationship away from like an investor relationship is empowering them to be like these beta users that like having more calls with them, doing mentorship with them. I'm still really good friends with all 3 of them, which has been like really fun. So I think that if you have customers and community members that want to be early investors, like lean into it. That's a great signal. And also, if you can find a way to get them involved, even if it's not through investment, they're going to be by your side for like the longevity of your business because they already love what you're doing when you're at like literally ground zero. So I say lean into it as much as you possibly can.
Great. John or Claire, anything to add, or should we jump on to the next question?
That's perfect. I think that was very well put.
Great. Totally great. From Bill Kleinbecker, any companies supporting the quote communities providing value use blockchain to be paid. So any companies that are supporting your communities, can you use blockchain to pay them? Seems to be a lower cost offering solution to this feature. Is offering discounts with a coupon. I don't know of any other kind of blockchain based businesses like this, but maybe there's someone looking to start a business out there. You can thank Bill for the idea. Do you guys know of any blockchain based businesses to this extent?
That is a little too deep tech for me. I'm a consumer guy here.
Great. Any other questions around this? Any questions from the audience? All right. So maybe to kind of wrap things up here, because I know we just have a couple minutes left. Any kind of words of wisdom, and I'm going to frame it to, if there's only one piece of advice you can give the audience about the community and building a great community, what is that one piece of advice before we wrap up here? You have 5 seconds to think about it.
10 true believers is better than 100 idle community members. That's my one piece of advice.
I like that.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate, know why community matters for your customer and for your business. Don't just tack it on as a side thought.
Claire stole mine, but yeah, I would say make a plan. Like go in with an intention of what you want people to get out of the community and why they're there.
And mine is start small, create value small, and that will snowball. And so especially for people that are dreaming big. Great.
Amen.
Any other questions? All right, it looks like we can wrap. So thanks everyone so much for the time today. Wish everyone the best of luck in their ventures. And I think you all can feel free to reach out to us on email or on any of the social networks that folks might be on. Sounds like Claire is probably the biggest influencer and has the biggest community of us all. So
Biggest in the game.
Biggest in the game.
Just kidding.
I'm going to take some notes, go stalk our community efforts, but amazing. Well, thank you everyone so much. Everyone have a great week and looking forward to seeing you next year. Take care.
Bye, everyone.